So welcome to this first session in Unit 513 around self-awareness. In part 1 we're going to be looking at our impact on others. In the introduction you've done, you should have watched a video, Know Your Saboteurs. If you haven't had a chance to watch that yet, go back and watch it, make some notes because we're going to review that in a second. Let's just quickly review that video. I hope you all enjoyed it and you took a little bit of motivation or encouragement from it, whatever you want, but I wanted you to look at it before we went into the detail of this unit because there are two main areas in there I wanted to focus on. One is he talks about recognizing that we all have saboteurs and it's a natural effect, something that just happens. It's in our brains, and we'll talk more about our brains later. He talks about it being a lens that distorts things. Our brain's just trying to help us. And the point he said we just need to be aware. He also talked about feedback. That's the second point. And he said it helps us. And he said he got feedback on people saying he was judging people too harshly. But we all need feedback, and we may not realize it at the time that it's good for us, but we need to use it, and we'll discuss feedback in a bit more detail later on in the session. So he talked about your sage, and self-awareness is about finding out what you are, what you do, and how you're perceived by others. And as he said, our brain uses survival mode with emotions, and we'll touch on that more because he talked about catching your saboteurs in action. And I suppose that's just about being aware. It doesn't mean you can stop them, but he said it weakens them if you're aware of them. And I suppose he sort of summed it up at the end, well, right through the talk really, when he was sort of summing up self-awareness really, because we shouldn't be beating ourselves up about it because it's a mindset or a perspective of being aware. He talked about PQ. So please don't let your saboteurs have too big an impact on you whilst you're doing this qualification. Keep an open mind, and I'll leave you with a phrase before we start that I've always tried to remember, which is, if you did half the things you were capable of, you would astound yourself. I suppose that's a bit like him saying, you are awesome. So let's have a look at what we're going to have a look at across session 1. So just before we get into the detail, our aims for this session are to understand our own impact on others and to understand emotional intelligence. So by the end of this session, you should be able to explain the importance of being aware of your own behaviour. You should be able to assess methods for gathering feedback on your own behaviour, evaluate how self-awareness can impact on performance, evaluate models of emotional intelligence, and explain why it is important for a leader to utilise emotional intelligence in the workplace. Now, we'll be briefly covering all these areas. It's then up to you to go away to do some research using the resources available and doing your own research on the internet. So let's start having a look at self-awareness. So this unit's entitled self-awareness. I think we need to establish what we really mean by that before we move on, because it's very important as leaders that we're self-aware. What's it about? Well, it's about having a clear perception of our own personality, including things such as our strengths, our weaknesses, our thoughts, our values, our beliefs, our motivations, our emotions, and as the speaker talked about, our saboteurs. Because allowing us to understand, that allows us to understand ourselves and know what we're like. But more importantly, it allows us to understand other people, how they might perceive us, how they might see our attitude and our responses to them, and then we can start thinking about how we can influence that and how we can make a difference. Because I hope we can all agree and we all buy into the fact that our behaviours, attitudes, approaches, the way we handle ourselves will have an impact on how we're perceived by others and the way they react to us and the way they behave towards us. It's also said that you're more likely to succeed in life if you know your talents and you use them to their fullest, and you're less likely to suffer problems if you know your weaknesses and you manage them so they don't impact on what you do. But that's easier said than done. It's one thing to know your strengths and weaknesses, but we will look at some tools and how we can evaluate that. It's one thing to know them, but to find the motivation to understand ourselves and to try and change them, or to realise the potential impact of our behaviours on others and how that can improve our working relationships and do something with it, is another step, and we'll look at that. But most people say that one of the characteristics of great leaders that they've met is that they understand and know themselves. They're ready to admit mistakes and they're comfortable with how they are, therefore they're self-confident. They see it as an important part of understanding themselves as a person, how they relate to the world and what they live in. And being more self-aware and knowing your strengths and weaknesses is more than that. It's about how you manage things like your emotions, how you pay attention to them, how you accept them and not get frustrated with them, how they impact on the way you perform, because some of us don't realise how much we're a bit like the saboteurs, how much we're defeating ourselves with our emotions, and understanding why we do things. It doesn't mean we can stop them. But it does mean we can start to try and lessen the impact, as the man talks about with the saboteurs. But why bother with all this fluffy stuff? I've heard people say, oh yeah, but it's all talking about my emotions isn't going to get me anywhere, I'm a manager. Well, becoming more self-aware in the workplace can help with better relationships with your colleagues, your superiors and stakeholders, and just make things more harmonious, and we work better when we're in a harmonious environment. If you are able to look at the issues objectively and look at yourself and the role you've played in creating the situations rather than it being about blaming other people, if you're more mindful about operating in the here and now and know why you might be, I don't know, there's some words on the screen there, why you might be causing antagonism, why you might be showing aggression, then if you know about those things and you're prepared to accept them, then straight away people are probably going to react to you better. Whether we like it or not, we all react to people's behaviours and how they approach us and how we perceive them. And one of the ideas behind that comes out in conflict management, but is still relevant, is Batari's box, which is talking about how my attitude affects my behaviour. And it's true. If we've got a bad attitude towards something, we may not realise it, but our behaviours will suffer. And if our behaviours aren't good, then it's going to affect other people's attitudes. They're going to start to think, oh, why are you acting like that? Why are you behaving like that? Why are you treating me like that? Whatever's going on. And then therefore that attitude is going to affect their behaviour. And it's a cyclic problem, a cyclic process. And the first step to it is recognising that it's happening. Being self-aware about what your attitude is to something will then have an impact without even you realising it on your behaviour. So if we can change our attitude and our behaviour and make sure that we've got that correct and in the right place, then we can have an impact on other people's attitudes and behaviours. As I said before, sometimes maybe it's about suddenly thinking, why are these people reacting like this? And maybe my attitude or my behaviour isn't correct. And it's just about leaders being self-aware, taking time to look at these things and trying to stop this unconscious loop, spotting where things are going wrong and trying to affect the attitude of others by first censoring our own approach to things. So most people's behaviours and attitudes therefore stem from other people's attitudes and behaviours without us even realising it. So I want you to watch the little video around micro behaviours on the screen after this. I want you to make some notes, and then when we come back we'll review it before we start looking at people's triggers and what starts off our emotions.